Hello everyone, welcome to the workshop. Due to the lockdown, I've spent quite a few hours here over the past couple of weeks, and one thing I've come to the conclusion to is some of my old tools really need replacing. For example, this is my old scribe that I made about 5 years ago in high school when I was learning how to use the old metal lathe. Now this little tool has certainly served me well over the past couple of years, it certainly shows it. One thing that can be improved is the tip, which I made from an old nail, which certainly has been dropped more times than I care to tell. So the aim of this project is to make a scribe that hopefully can be dropped without breaking the tip. This project should be pretty straightforward. It consists of only 4 components: a needle tip, an outer, an inner, and a back component, which can all be made on the lathe. This cross section should show how the outer unscrews and slides up and down the inner in order to hide and expose the needle tip. The material I'll use for this project is some leftover brass from a previous project and some sewing needles for the tip. In this project, I'll stick to using these 0 side rake high-speed tools. I like these ones because they are really easy to sharpen on the diamond stone and work really well with brass. The first operation that we'll need to do is clean up the ends by doing some facing cuts. We'll have to do this for both sides. The next job is to drill a hole for the threads to be tapped, so we'll start by using a centered drill before using a twist drill to drill the hole to size. The piece is then flipped and the same operation is done on the other side except using a larger hole. Next we need to form the taper on the outer surface, so we need to change the compound angle, a thing that is more complicated on this lathe than it really needs to be. After doing the first cuts, I wasn't exactly happy with this angle, so I lowered it to a shallower angle. The surface finish is then cleaned up with a fine cut file. The first hole that we drilled is then tapped to accept an M8x1 pitch thread. Off camera, I turned up this bolt so the outer can thread onto it. A live center is used to hold the end of the outer in place while I clean up the surface finish with a file and then some sandpaper. And with that, we have the first component done. Next, we need to turn up the inner component, so we need to remove quite a lot of brass to turn it down to size. The brass is then marked, and the space between the threads is marked and then turned down with a carbide parting tool. The parting tool isn't really designed for these types of cuts, but using light cuts, it makes easy work of the brass. The ends are then chamfered to help the die cut the threads. Finally, a small hole is drilled at the end and tapped to accept a small M4 by 0.7 pitch thread. This component still needs a hole to house the needle, but we'll come back to that part later. Now we need to make the end piece. So we'll start by facing the brass and then turning it down to 4mm so it can be threaded. The part is then flipped, faced, and a taper cut on the end. The file and some sandpaper is quickly used to improve the surface finish. Now we need to cut our needle down to size, and because they are made from really hard steel, they can be easily snapped in a vise using a pair of pliers. The needles are 0.8mm in diameter, which is unfortunately a diameter which I don't have a drill bit for, but in his video, Clickspring showed how to grind an improvised D-bit cutter which can be used for light cuts. The inner piece is chucked on the Sherline lathe and a D-bit is used to create a small hole. The needle is then glued into place using some CA glue. And with that, it's time to assemble the scribe. The inner is screwed into the outer, and the back piece is then glued into the inner. And assuming that I did that all correctly, this is the end product. The resulting scribe is definitely a huge up from my old scribe. Not only is the tip much more precise, but the tip can be retracted, so even if I do end up dropping the scribe, which I can definitely assume that I will in the future, the needle won't be broken. The action is smooth, simple, but effective. I gotta say, I'm really happy with how this product turned out. And with that, I really hope you enjoyed watching this video and hopefully you learned something. Thank you very much for watching.